North New Mexico 6-county land grant movement, which you have headed.
Right.
I would like to begin where we began when you came into my office last night, yesterday evening, early. We had the news of Martin Luther King's assassination. This morning, just as you walked into my office, some kind of a disturbance involving police cars and both black and white, obviously high school students, was taking place under the windows of KPFA's office. And I said, God help us all. And I liked your reply.
I said that God could not help us any longer. He has run out of patience, and we have mocked him too many times. We got him fed up, and I think that we are running out of time, and the patience of God is also running out. I don't think that we have left him any alternative, and he chose to help us. He has been trying to help us for hundreds and thousands of years. And we have been mocking his true justice, his true democracy, by destroying mankind and establishing our own kind of democracy. So that's why I feel that there's no way. This is a typical day, a typical act, the assassination, cold-blooded murder of the symbol of peace and the representation of the rights of the poor through a meek and wise man, Dr. King. The government, I feel, is responsible by encouraging, by not developing ways for the poor, ways for the oppressed, only ways and means for the bankers, for the powerful, for the whites. And that is why I feel that the federal government of the United States is pushing its own people to destruction, to the end of this empire.
You were dealing, I believe, with Dr. Martin Luther King about the proposed march on Washington, which was to take place on the 26th of this month. Could you tell us something about what those plans were?
In August the 26th to 28, 1967, I approached Martin Luther King in the airport of Chicago when they had this New Politics Convention. And I suggested to him a coalition between the brown people, the black people, also the Indians and poor whites. He said it was high time. And that was all. I didn't heard from him until this year. I think it was February, where he invited me to come to Atlanta, Georgia, March the 14th. I arrived in Atlanta, Georgia, and some 25 leaders of other organizations of the brown people, also white people, Indian people, and black people. It was there that a coalition was formed. It was there that Dr. King talked to us. It was there that Dr. King reminded and point out to the people in that Pachel's Hotel in Atlanta, Georgia, that I had suggested to him the idea and that he had embraced it, and it was high time. A steering committee was formed out of the various races and groups to steer and direct the coordination, the plans on the Washington March that is coming April the 22nd, and that will escalate up to June, probably June the 15th.
The committee will meet in Washington on the 22nd.
On the 22nd, right.
Will be on the 26th. Is that it?
Yes. The steering committee and about 100 leaders will visit various offices of the government departments and Congress. And then after that, 3,000 people will arrive to stay in the capital. And then after that, people will start arriving according to the plans by thousands from all over the United States.
And this was to go on and build and build.
Escalate, yes.
Yes.
Yes, this is one of the greatest plans. Highlight the perfection and the, I don't know how to put it in this second language of mine, but it was the greatest of the plans that Martin Luther King had come out with. It was something fantastic, beautiful, and it will be, I have no doubts, unless the committee changed the hope. But I understand, I have contact. I was called from Atlanta, Georgia just last night, and up to now they're going ahead with the march.
And Reverend Abernathy, I believe, is taking Dr. King's place as the head of the Christian Leadership Conference.
Right.
Have you had a chance to speak with Dr. Abernathy?
No, not yet. However, I am invited personally by Reverend Abernathy to speak in his church in the very near future, a week or two, and I will be speaking to him.
And you are expecting then that from all over the country, the minority people will come to Washington over a period of time?
Yes. The Mexican Americans, Spanish Americans are uniting and recruiting people, just like the Indians and the black people, for this great march.
Well,
this was called by Martin Luther King. Campaign.
Be pushed, I suppose. They placed me on. Gone through the same experience, some even worse experience than mine, and they all felt that the time had come that they should decide that we would have to stop supporting the bus company until we were given better service. And the first day of remaining off the bus had been so successful. It was organized in that we wouldn't ride the bus until our request had been granted. We didn't know just what to expect. In our area, we always try to avoid trouble and be as careful as possible to stay out of trouble along the line. We had no quarrel with anyone. We only want to stop riding the buses until we are treated as any other passenger.
Children of the world, yeah. All over the world, yeah. Little boys and girls, yeah. We need you, yeah. There's no one else to go to. You hold the world. I want you to understand, yeah. You better wait on your shoulder. I'm gonna need a loving hand. Hold my hand, will ya? The world is dying every day. Show us the way, yeah. You're a star in my eyes, yeah. The future, yeah. You're the future of my people, yeah. You're the only one ice melts away. Let the warmth of the sun fill the void. That's why I live. It's who I am. I gotta give, gotta love, touch one soul. Raise my voice, sing it loud. Say the words, I am here. Touch one soul, touch one soul, touch one soul, touch one soul, touch one soul.
Welcome, Dre 2024. How you doing?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you. If you are watching, we are about to kick off the Liberation Library. I got to work on my fade in and fade out. That was really abrupt. So sorry about that, y'all who are listening and watching. Dre 2024. Is my sound coming through okay to you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. I'm going to try to project to make sure that it's also coming through on the LinkedIn for those of us who will be watching this now or later. But it's 11 o'clock, and let's go ahead and get started the way we always get started, with our centering exercise. So let's sit as you're able with your feet firmly planted on the ground. Let's imagine that the balls of our feet are extending from our body, deeply rooted in the earth, connected to the other people on this call, and also connected to the stories of struggle and solidarity, those that are known and those that are unknown. Relax your shoulders, swallow a couple of times, and close your eyes. Let's breathe in by our noses and out of our mouths, always using our throats. For this breathing exercise, the directions are simple. Breathe in as long as possible, breathe in as slowly as possible, and breathe in as deeply as possible. Let's breathe together. Inhale, breathing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. And exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Release. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Full expansive lungs. And exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Release. The deepest breath of the day, we're taking it together as one connected community. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. And exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Release. Open up your eyes. Come on back to center. Dre 2024. How did that feel today?
That felt great. That was my first breathing for today, so necessary and needed. And so I appreciate it.
Good. So first, before we get into the work of today, I want to remind our listeners and our watchers why we do this and what we do. First, we do this work of the Liberation Library because it has become apparent that the stories that we need to keep us engaged, keep us connected, the stories of equity, justice, and solidarity are not widely known. And we have to use our own effort to make sure we know all of the stories, because in our own identities, in our own experiences, we have part of the puzzle. We have our own perspectives and our own insights. And if we are not connected to others, then those perspectives and insights might become our limited reality. They might not become the reality, but it's only our part. In order to have the entire picture of what is happening and also the way forward, we need to be in relationship with each other so that we can see other parts of the same story. We know that we have one part together. We can see more when we're in relationship. We can see more when we know more stories about each other, and that helps us to see the stories of ourselves. We do this work in the Metaverse because it's a frictionless, not necessarily frictionless, because it takes a lot to get up here, but it's a boundary-free space. It's a boundary-free space that allows us to try on new ways of being, and also to be critical about the ways we show up in real life. In this world, there are only the restrictions on ourselves that we put, and also it's not bounded by the physical world in terms of geography. So anyone can join in the space, anyone can watch the space. If you want to learn more about our work in the Metaverse and how it connects to racial justice and solidarity, feel free to reach out directly to me at 228 Accelerator. But before we jump into this powerful work of today in Reies Tijerina, Dre, I want to just have a touch point about the must see TV that happened on Tuesday and what you thought about it.
I was very pleased with it. I was very pleased with it. Obviously, I feel like we there. I think as some of us as viewers like expected what we expected. I think Kamala did a fantastic job throughout, and I thought it was definitely great TV.
Great TV.
How about
I think that my emotions before and my emotions after were different. I think when I was watching, what I kept thinking like, why is this the matchup?
you?
I was thinking about how did it get this far that our discourse has eroded that we will allow someone to say such awful things about other humans publicly.
Right.
Like we have
Right.
been adjusted to this. They're like, wow, we got this far, and getting this far is the problem.
Right.
So I think that is probably the sobering part of the evening, and that there are a lot of. I mean, if you look at the polls, there's still 54%. I mean, there's still not, I wouldn't say 54%. There are a lot of people that are still supporting that way of thinking, that mindset. So it's a little bit sobering. I think that as a black woman, I know that you could do everything right and still lose.
Right.
And that
I
part,
think I think that's what. So I'm glad you shared that because now, like, I feel like in the beginning, before watching it, I was high anxiety.
yeah,
Because I felt like I knew what was coming within the first 2 to 3 minutes. He already started naming black and brown people and like doing what he normally does in his playbook. And it took me a minute to ground myself so that I could watch the rest of it. I did rewatch some of it yesterday, and I felt exactly the same way you felt. Like, I think what was like a little triggering too is that, like after the debate, it's like everyone was saying like Kamala definitely won that, right? But like many years ago, people said that about Hillary, and look what happened.
right.
So I agree. There was that feeling.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not necessarily. We won't know. I think what's going to happen, but I think one thing that I can put money on is that the work there will still be work to do to rebuild, regardless of who wins the election. It's a different type of work.
Yes.
And the fact that our society has gotten to the point that we tolerate this level of rhetoric, we still tolerate, um, you know, language that hurts and just is mean, is
Right.
probably some of the problems that we'll have to work to rebuild. Because each time we hear something like awful, it hurts. Like we might not be aware of the impact, but the fact that a national leader is saying these things has huge impact on the experiences of our lives. So I think like that is definitely a point. I'm going to say it again. Just because you do everything right doesn't mean you're going to win, and that's also front and center. And probably that's the wisdom of being in a body of color and in a body marginalized body. Like I know that personally.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm
Right.
sure you do too. Like
Yeah.
you could do everything right and still
Yep.
not be the one who's chosen. Um,
Right.
so that's sobering, right? That's sobering.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Anything else you want to say about that before we jump into the work?
Not related to that, but I'm also thinking about like, I think there's this discourse that I've been seeing on TikTok, and the shooting in Georgia,
Oh,
the school
that.
shooting.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to raise that because I know there's a lot of, every time that happens, like I know educators feel, and we have a lot of educator audience here.
Yeah.
And I know there's always this feeling of anxiety. I think I know between my educator friend group that it was frustrating that that conversation didn't really come up in the debate. And I think, we just keep going through that cycle of experiencing it, but then also like having to breathe in, breathe out. during those situations. So, shout out to educators. Thank you for the work.
Shout out to
Um,
educators. Shout out to educators for sure. Because I don't know what it must be like to go to work and that fear in the back of your head, you might not come home. And I think
yeah,
to reset that is the experience of many educators, and what it means that that needs to be kept front and center, and we need to develop, whether they're wired technologies or ancient unwired technologies, to make sure that that doesn't happen again. I think that's worth conversation. That's worth discourse. It feels
right.
a bit tone deaf to talk about, I'm, you know, and look, I'm a big fan of AI. Don't get me wrong, but like, we're talking about AI and all these emerging technologies, and get me like, again, I can sometimes be complicit in this, but like, folks are dying. Like,
Yeah,
children are being shot, teachers are being shot, and it's like, why? Like, at what point will we say we can hold both of these conversations? They're both important, but blood on the dance floor is not complicated. Blood on the
right,
dance floor is not complex at all. Like, people are
right,
dying, right? So I think there's
right.
there's a level of courage that's required to keep conversations front and center, to make sure that even if it's uncomfortable, we don't shy away from it. Even if we don't know the answers, we don't shy away from it, because
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's okay not to know the answer, but we definitely won't know the answer if we're ignoring it.
correct. Yep.
All right, all right. So, we're gonna try a different format today, y'all. If you're listening, and I'm gonna play a little bit of the excerpt of Reies Tijerina, at the beginning, the Federal Alliance of Land Restoration. And Dre, 2024. Did you get a chance to read a little bit about this guy?
No, I haven't.
Yo, dude was bad. Anyway, but not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good. So I'm going to set the stage really quick, because I did some work on background work. One, he was born in 1926. His parents were subjected to the sharecropping economy, so he was born to sharecroppers. Born on a pile of cotton sacks. Born.
Oh,
Let's just hold that for a second.
yeah.
You were born on a sack of cotton. Um, and his cause was land grant restoration. And this is why the U.S. Mexican War, 100 million acres of land was up, and the treaty guaranteed land rights to, the people of that land, the indigenous Americans, the Hispanic Americans, Latinx Americans, 100 million acres. It was decided that the U.S. Congress be the arbiter of those international treaties, and the U.S. Congress decided, with a Senate vote, not to honor the treaty, and they lost 100 million acres.
Hmm.
But the international treaty was in place that restored the acreage. So you're talking about, there's a treaty, there was a war, there was a treaty. The treaty said, hey, you're not going to lose your land. And then the U.S. Congress said, hey, we're going to vote on this, and voted that they're going to lose their land, and lost their land. So his cause was land grant restoration. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Man, how does that make you feel that that's even something that we have to talk about?
I know. I do. It's so, as you're like saying this stuff too, it's just like bringing back to the point of like our conversation too. Like, I've never heard of it before. This is my
Well,
first time.
that part. So let's talk about that. Why we didn't know this story, and because that makes me feel like, if I didn't know this, what else do I not know?
Right. And the thing is like, as we talked about in terms of like history classes and the history that's being taught, like, a lot of revisionists, a lot of things that try to cover up some things, and just looking even, this is talking about like, it's definitely talking about poverty. It's definitely talking about colonization and land being taken away, and those are just stories that they don't want to put up in the forefront.
And let's, like, who is the they? Because I think there might be an idea that folks are running around and like deciding what stories will be told. Do we think it's that conscious, Dre 2024?
I think yes and no.
Yeah.
I think yes. I think yes. There are definitely companies and like things where they'll like definitely censor out stories. I used to work in one,
Uh-huh.
and then where they like flat out were like take out all of the LGBTQ stories. Um, and then second, I think because that's how the stories have been. You know, what's that phrase that you used before? Like basically because that's how it's been practiced. You just keep doing it over and over
Mm.
again without recognizing it.
Reproduction?
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I agree. I do think that there is some intentional removal of stories. And so I think we have to expend a little bit of effort to realize that just in, in our classes, we might only be getting the stories that our teacher knows.
Right.
And we have to then take it upon ourselves to think like, okay, as learners, seeking and finding out the stories that we need to know and hear to help us see the whole entire picture. Because when we see the whole entire picture, perhaps we will make different actions and we'll make different decisions. So, first, what I want to do is play a little bit, just the beginning, just to hear his voice, bring his spirit into the space, and then we'll lean into our excerpts as reactions. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
All right, let's pull it up. First. Ba-da-da-da-da. Let me see if I can pull it up on my phone.
I'm in the studio with Reies López Tijerina, who is head of the organization called Federal Alliance of Free City States. Now, that is more commonly known, I believe, as the North New Mexico six-county land grant movement, which you have headed.
Right.
I would like to begin where we began when you came into my office last night, yesterday evening. Early, we had the news of Martin Luther King's assassination. This morning, just as you walked into my office, some kind of a disturbance involving police cars and both black and white, obviously high school students, was taking place under the windows of KPFA's office. And I said, God help us all. And I liked your reply.
I said that God could not help us any longer. He has run out of patience, and we have mocked him too many times. We got him fed up, and I think that we are running out of time, and the patience of God is also running out. I don't think that we have left him any alternative, and he chose to help us. He has been trying to help us for hundreds and thousands of years, and we have been mocking his true justice, his true democracy, by destroying mankind and establishing our own kind of democracy. So that's why I feel that there's no way. This is a typical day, a typical act, the assassination, cold-blooded murder of the symbol of peace and the representation of the rights of the poor through a meek and wise man, Dr. King. The government, I feel, is responsible by encouraging, by not developing ways for the poor, ways for the oppressed, only ways and means for the bankers, for the powerful, for the whites. And that is why I feel that the federal government of the United States is pushing its own people to destruction, to the end of this empire.
You were dealing, I believe.
So let's pause there, Dre 2024. You had some reactions. What quotes are really resonating and jumping out to you as we jump into this discussion about Reies López Tijerina's work in the Federal Alliance of Free City States?
That whole second paragraph.
Read it out. Read it out loud to us for our listeners, because I was like, "Yo, you said that. Thank you for saying that out loud."
I like gasped. I don't know if you heard me. I said
Yeah.
girl, like halfway through that paragraph. It reminds, first of all, I want to say that this reminds me of the phrase that we tend to use now, which is thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'll read it. It says, I said that God could not help us any longer. He has run out of patience and we have mocked him too many times. We got him fed up, and I think that we are running out of time and the patience of God, he's also running out. I don't think that we have living left him any alternative, any choice to help us. He has been trying to help us for hundreds and thousands of years, and we have been and mocking his true justice, his true democracy by destroying mankind and establishing our own kind of democracy. So that's why I feel that there's no way this is a typical day, a typical act, the assassination, cold blood murder of the symbol of peace, and the representation of the rights of the poor through a meek and wise man, Dr. King. The government, I feel, is responsible by encouraging, by not developing ways for the poor, ways for the oppressed, only ways and means for the bankers, the more powerful for the whites, and that is why I feel that the federal government of the United States is pushing its own people to the destruction, to the end of this empire. It sounds so familiar.
Mm.
It's so interesting. We say this every week though, or every time we do this. Like, what's the time frame on this? 1960s.
Yep.
And for it to be just too relevant to what's happening today is just, it's interesting, it's scary, it's all of the things. And I feel like I resonated with it. Like I said, like I typed LOL in the chat. I definitely gasped a little bit. What were your thoughts when you heard it the first time?
I thought it might have been one of the most honest things I've heard in a long time. Is it God? Like, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry.
So I was gonna say, I feel like if we said this today out loud, I mean, we're saying it out loud right now in this podcast. I feel like people would feel offended,
I mean,
or people would feel that way.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think that one, it's important to know that I think he was a preacher.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he definitely feels comfortable using theological and religious discourse. So I think that's important to name that out loud. But I think it's important to also know that, like, what he is talking about immediately after the assassination, there's a student demonstration outside. You know, there are a lot of things happening. And it's like, what I hear him saying is that my heart is broken. Like, if we can't do this ourselves, why are we going to call on supernatural help? We can't even get ourselves together. You know, it's like, and I think that there's a lot of sadness in this statement. God cannot help us any longer. He's run out of patience, and we've mocked him too many times, right? And he said,
Yeah.
to cold-bloodedly murder a meek and wise man. But I think what's also powerful about the statement, he was like, the government, I feel, is responsible by encouraging, by not developing ways for the poor, the ways for the oppressed, and only means for the bankers, for the powerful, for the whites. And that's why I feel that the federal government of the United States is pushing its own people to the destruction, to the end of this empire. Whoa. So let's do a text to self connection and then bring it back to the present. Do you think we're being pushed to the destruction of our empire?
Yes. I feel like we are, because the ways that it talks about, like, the priority of the rich and the most powerful and the bankers, and how the government, like, protects that and protects that privilege, that power, that white privilege, the white supremacy stuff. Like, I feel like we're being pushed to the end of that destruction. But at the same time, like, I do want to offer that I also have a sense of hope with, like, the different movements that are happening and the different pieces of resistances that are happening within spaces to make sure that we don't do that. And I was listening to a post debate comment around um, people trying to feel united around this idea that we just don't want the destruction for the end of this empire. But I feel like depending on which side, like destruction to the end of this empire could look different based on a person's point of view.
Well, and that was going to be my next thing. Do you think that the destruction of the empire is a bad thing? Um,
No.
yeah. So let's talk about that. Like, why don't you think it's a bad thing? And then we'll continue to move forward with
I
Reies
feel like
Tijerina.
I feel like we've been living too long in old ways. It's time. We talked about this before. I think it's time. Like we're ready for a new world. New
Yeah.
world that's focused on like community and collectivism. Um, and I really like the word choice of empire, um, because of the way that our world is constructed around this idea of empire. And so, actually, now that we're like talking about it, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to hold the language play because I think, in the one hand, when we have a lot of activists and a lot of teachers, and we're saying, hey, we don't want supremacy, we don't want male
Right.
supremacy, we don't want white supremacy, and those are design features of the old empire.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, and I think James Baldwin said that in a talk to teachers, like when we are pushing against and trying to change the ways of the old, we should plan. And part of the plan should be to expect the pushback, to expect the system to do everything it can to conserve itself, and I think that that might be one of the mistakes, if I would say, like strategic mistakes. I don't know if I it's one thing to hear in your ears to plan for the backlash. It's another thing to have the bodily wisdom to prepare for the backlash, and then know what to do. So I think that when we are saying that, hey, we want these systems to be redesigned, we are also calling for the end of that empire of domination. And again, Drake 2024, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Right.
Especially if it means that the folks on who've been historically excluded and marginalized are included. They get a chance to live longer and suffer less. And if an empire is getting in the way of life, then yeah, of course, remove the empire. But then I think then it gets real sticky, right? It gets real sticky real quick. So tell me, what do you think one of the ways that we can do to, let's see, destruction of this empire? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I think first, like it's have like continue. Like I think we talked about this before. Like in order to um, get rid of some of the systems to move into that community collectivism, um, collectivism way of life. I feel like we need to start by having these conversations and continuing to like have these different spaces where we can talk about these things, but then also practice what it looks like. I think we're just not given that many spaces to practice what it looks like. And I think those are particularly important, like especially like in schools.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think just an opportunity to like practice. Like we're not going to get to that place overnight tomorrow. And as we've talked about this a million times in the past around movements and how movements, like there's always that slow and steady movement, and that like our movement's actually moving. Like I think we need to start there.
I could not agree more. I think that one of the ways that we can move to destroy this particular empire that's created so much theft and so much bloodshed and so much suffering is to starting to come together. It sounds really corny. It sounds really like it doesn't sound very exotic at all. It sounds like it's something that
Right.
we all can do, But I think what the hard work is evaluating our own conditioning not to do it.
Right.
Our own conditioning and our own socialization actually not to do it. And you know, we're going to talk about, you know, multiracial and multicultural coalitions if we think that that is the way. But I want to then go back to Reies Tijerina's voice again when he talks about his own encounter with Dr. King himself. And then I think that will tee us up for a very, very rich conversation. You ready?
Yes.
All right, let's do it.
Plans were
In August the 26th to 28, 1967, I approached Martin Luther King in the airport of Chicago when they had this New Politics Convention. And I suggested to him a coalition between the brown people, the black people, also the Indians and poor whites. He said it was high time. And that was all. I didn't heard from him until this year. I think it was February, where he invited me to come to Atlanta, Georgia. March the 14th. I arrived in Atlanta, Georgia, and some 25 leaders of other organizations of the brown people, also white people, Indian people, and black people. It was there that a coalition was formed. It was there that Dr. King talked to us. It was there that Dr. King reminded and pointed out to the people in that Pachel's Hotel in Atlanta, Georgia, that I had suggested to him the idea and that he had embraced it, and it was high time. A steering committee was formed out of the various races and groups to steer and direct the coordination, the plans on the Washington March that is coming April the 22nd, and that will escalate up to June, probably June the 15th.
All right, so I'm going to stop there. First of all, Dre 2024, did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't either. So let's talk about what it means, like, if we knew that story, that the whole idea of a multiracial coalition actually came from someone committed to the cause but of a different race. Committed to solidarity but might not be in the cultural group that had the power at the moment to push through social change. What when you think about that, let's talk about implications to our own learning. What does that make you think, and what comes up for you?
I think what it makes me think is that when we usually read things about history, they're usually in a binary, or they're in a binary where it's like black and white. Mm-hmm. And what this shows is that other groups of people participated in this movement, and they were unified in this movement. And so when I think about implications, I think it models for people, like as we read these different things, it models for people how we can exist in a multiracial like democracy in this sense, you know, like we're organizing together. Yes. And we're unified in a mission, and we're unified together. Because often the story of the March on Washington is a black and white story. Mm-hmm. That's the narrative that is fed to us, and so this allows us to see look, everybody was like involved in it, and other groups were involved in it.
Yeah, so it's important, I think, to mark there were two marches, right? Two convenings, two protests on Washington. First, it was the March on Washington in 1963, right? And the organizer of the March on Washington in 1963, Barrett Rustin, we know that, rah, that's amazing. And I also want to point out that was a queer black man who was the architect of the March on Washington. Right. Then we had the Poor People's Campaign that happened in 1968. And I think what is important to note that the Poor People's Campaign in 1968 also was the multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic coalition. And to create that coalition, what Reies Tijerina is saying is like, I had a part in that. I had a part in that. So Dre 2024, I think you're so right. If we don't know the stories, we don't see ourselves as agents or vessels of solidarity, as vessels of coalition building, because we don't have an example or a model of doing it before. So before we go to the next excerpt, let's first take a pause for implications and connections to school. How do we think that schools can teach solidarity and multiracial coalition building?
I think using this text is a good example, or finding multiple texts where you see the multiracial groups working together, and changing that narrative. Like, I would even take what they already have in the history books and then add these as supplements to ask them like what's missing. Why like have them think critically about it, because like I'm what I'm reflecting on right now, Tutu Accelerator,
What's that?
is I remember when we learned these things. I As a kid I asked myself about like, well, did Asian people exist
Mm-hmm.
in this time? Like, did and I did, and this is just a transparent conversation too, because I messaged you before about like, because I remember you said you had like articles that talked about Asian participation during the civil rights movement,
Mm-hmm.
and I always wondered as a young kid in fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, being like, where am I in this history? Where am I in this movement? Like, did we do anything?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important to, um, showcase what narrative is being told and push students to think critically around, okay, what is this narrative saying? What's missing? And then plug in those pieces and ask them, like, what if we had all of these narratives together? And how does that change your thought from the first time we read it in this narrative form to the other different narratives that we read?
Yeah, and I think this is where, space and the limitations of physical space might make it harder. It doesn't make it impossible to have narratives connected. And I think that's why one of the
Right.
things that we're trying to play with and experiment with in the metaverse, especially in these spaces that don't confine or conform to the laws of physics in in the real world. But it's like, what does it mean to put these two stories together and have a student see the connection themselves? We don't have to explicitly force the connection. We don't have to tell them the connection. You can see it. You can see that there were different people in different bodies all pushing for the same thing, which then gives everybody a role to play in building coalition. It's not just one's group responsibility. Yeah. What else do you think? You're closer to the classroom than I am.
Yeah, and I think it would just be an exciting thing for the youth to see this. Like, I wish I knew this text earlier when I was teaching social studies in 2018, 2019, because I think it would make the conversations more rich.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the youth are so used to seeing those things. We did talk a lot about what was missing. And, as an educator, I will say, like, um, being able to have access or find these texts on your own is hard, but like, I
Yeah.
think this is why these spaces are important.
Yeah. So let's do some. This might be some Bloom's level 5 type questions, but had you known this story, or had seen people like you in the fight for justice when you were 8 or 9 or 10, what impact do you think predict the impact it could have had on your educational journey? And yeah, what do you think? How do you think that would have changed your own path, if it would have changed your own path?
Yeah, I definitely think it would allow me to think. Um, it would allow me to be a little bit more courageous in my thinking about how I can participate in movements or participate in civic dialogue and discussion and all of these things. And I say this because, like, again, I'm for those who don't know, I'm Filipinx American, and for a long time, because I didn't see myself in these histories, in these movements, I felt kind of lost in, like, how could I participate other than, in learning and in being in dialogue with others. But um, I didn't see people reflected in that history. And, like, to be honest, Teach Ed Accelerator, like, I didn't learn about Grace Lee Boggs till I met you.
Aw.
Like, to be honest, like, that was what, 4 or 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
so I feel like the last 4 or 5 years I've accelerated in my journey. Pun on accelerator. I have accelerated in my journey, but had I known it since I was a kid, I think it would have changed the way that I thought about not only myself, but the way that how can the Asian American community be a part of these movements, you know?
I would agree. I would definitely agree. I think for me, it's for a while. I feel like I've been on the earth for maybe almost half a century now. Not quite yet, but almost there. I think the first half of my life, I was working to conform to a system that I probably didn't see me, but I was like, is that what this is all about? Like, make a lot of money and then you just get in where you fit in, and you take the hits where you go? Or is there another reason why we get smart? Is there another reason why we learn to write really, really well? Is it just to accumulate more money? Or is it to get the skills to create more space for others, right? And you can define that however you want, right? And I think for me, I now have. I think if I had been, because I think I had that instinct early, but didn't have the courage to follow it early. And I probably would not have wasted so much time.
Yeah.
I might not have wasted so much time, but of course things happen the way they're supposed to happen. I don't spend much time rehashing and playing the what if game. But I think for a lot of people, belonging is a human. It's a human instinct. We all want and need to belong. It's a part of what makes us healthy and whole. And I think when we are in this space where the narrative around going and doing well in school is for a job alone. If that's not compelling, there are other reasons why to do well in school, right?
Right.
And I think to also help students understand where they fit to creating and ushering in a new world, not reproducing the current world, could be a compelling and inspiring reason to achieve at the highest levels. Because you're not just doing it for yourself. I don't know, but I definitely think that seeing yourself in stories is super important. I was talking to my older sister this morning, and I said, I learned about James Baldwin, but no one talked about the fact that he was a gay man when I was in high school. I learned about Lorraine Hansberry. No one talked about the fact that she was a lesbian woman in high school, and how that, the impact of that erasure, but also how much more lively the people are as humans when we are able to see all parts of themselves and what they did with their human talents.
Right. Yeah. Right.
All right. We're going to go to our, you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was gonna say too, like, I think, again, speaking from my Filipinx American, Asian American experience, like, I think oftentimes we're told this narrative around, like you said, you're writing or you're learning these things to make more money. And I felt like, that was the case. Like, oh, you need to go be a nurse, you need to go be a doctor, you need to go be this, versus, like, seeing yourself as an organizer is another story, because I feel like I could. I feel like now I could. But had I known the stories of Asian American organizers who participate in movements, and I guess when you say, would it change my trajectory? I think it would have given me more permission to myself so that I could be an organizer as a high schooler or early college, even a middle schooler, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, again, those narratives are important.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're gonna close out our last and final excerpt. This is not the last time we go in and explore Tijerina's life. We're gonna be coming back in another week, 2 weeks, to close out Latinx Heritage Month. But we're not going to talk about his work in New Mexico and explicitly around land grants and the connection between land and identity. So it's going to start a little bit before, but when you hear the host say, "When did you go to New Mexico?" then Tijerina is going to talk about the U.S. and Mexican War, the impact on land, and then we'll talk a little bit about the impact on identity. All right, let's go.
We were
A minister. What kind of a minister?
non-denominational Protestant minister.
But your family were agricultural workers, and you yourself worked in the fields as you grew up.
That was my trade, yes, field work.
When did you go to New Mexico?
I had been there before, but I had refused to join the land claimants, the people that had been fighting and with the federal government and claiming certain rights under a Treaty of Guadalupe that was signed between the United States and Mexico, February the 2nd, 1848. However, people coming in the fields of Arizona, the neighbors burned my house and 16 other houses of my fellow brothers who together had decided to build a little village called the Valley of Peace. In the period of 3 years, they burned our house, our church, our store, our school, 17 homes. After
who burned them?
The neighbors, Anglo-Americans, civilized Anglo-Americans.
Why?
Because we refused to send our children to their school, and because they thought we were communists. And Don Pelton, the FBI agent, was called to investigate. He refused flatly. Lawrence White, the sheriff of the Pinal County, was invited, or rather asked many times to come and investigate the burnings. He refused flatly. And he was there, and then that we decided to move into New Mexico. And that burning, the destruction of our property, changed part of my life and the course of my life. From Bible, religious teaching to civil and international law and land, which is what is involved in this whole struggle.
So I'm going to pause there. Dre 2024, what did you notice? What does it make you think? Surprises, things that you didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the narrative of it in terms of like people getting mad that they didn't want to send them to their school so they burned down their neighborhoods is not new to me.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that narrative before. We see that narrative not just here in the United States but globally.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, no, I just didn't know any of these narratives before.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm holding and listening to like I have learned from probably it feels like birth the story of the Tulsa race massacre, and the property and land theft that happened there, and the land theft that happens all the way around. But the quote, he says, the neighbors burned my house. The neighbors burned my house and 16 other houses of my fellow brothers who had decided to build a little village called the Valley of Peace. So it's like, I've decided to move to be with people like me, and you're still going to come and burn my house.
Right.
Let's talk about the impact of that on multiracial coalitions.
Sorry, say that again?
Let's talk about the impact of the fact that is a pattern on multiracial coalitions.
Yeah. I think, one of the things is that they don't want people to be together. That's partially the reason why I think when you talked about, like, are these when I say they, are these conscious decisions? Is there somebody out there who are making the decisions? It's like yes and no. And it's also like there's intentionality of making sure that these stories aren't seen, or that there's a recognition that there is solidarity between different groups of people, because then that leads to the destruction of their empire.
I think it's also important to note that this is happening in, um, let's see, he says, February 2nd, 1848, the neighbors burned my house down. I think he might have meant 1948. Um,
Mm.
but what I want to say is, like, the U.S. government and vigilantes expelled 2 to 3 Mexican Americans, many of them children, at the beginning and the middle of the Great Depression, because there was fear they would take white jobs. So we're looking and thinking about the people who burned the house were also the people who consumed those narratives that if you were not white, you were other.
Right.
Um, and you were a threat. So even if you had moved yourself far away, you were still considered enemy number one. And I think it's important to note it makes people skeptical of multiracial coalitions, because there's fear there. There's fear that's deep in the body, um, that makes you not want to trust other people. But as we can see, that even if you move away, that might not always protect you. And
Right.
what I think will protect you, and this might not be popular, is we just have to do the deep work of rebuilding our relationships. And that will be one of the ways to destroy the empire that has plagued all of us. What do you think about that, Dre? It's not sexy. It's not exotic. In fact, it's the hardest way forward. That building
Right.
multiracial coalitions, not just having people who look different in the same space, but true coalition is the way forward. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what makes it, like you say, unsexy is that it'll take a long time. it it's gonna require a lot of conversations, a lot of uncomfortable conversations, a lot of courage. But I think getting I like most things that we've experienced or we've seen in history, they are moved in smaller movements, like that become bigger movements.
Yeah.
And those are when changes happen. And of course, we will always experience resistance. It's just how consistent are we, and how I don't know if determined is the right word, but like how determined are we to continue to keep going?
Yeah. I would agree. And I think that the determination to keep going is so, so important. But, I think it's important to situate some of the context and complexity of the current moment. We are in a moment now that the word equity is being seen as bad, that no
Yeah,
one wants to talk about it. And it's literally being erased from policy, from practice. And I think it's important to note, because if you take the word equity out, what you're also doing is removing the direction of how people should interact when they are sharing space together. Does that make sense?
hmm,
So if you have
yeah,
diversity, it's a whole bunch of different people. If you have inclusion, there are a whole bunch of different people, and they might be like, I think diversity and inclusion might be the same thing, very, very similar. But I was like, equity is like, do we share voice? Do
mm,
we share ownership? Do we have say? Do it's like that. The equity part, I think, is what redesigns the relationship. Um, and I think removing that, you could have you can have different people in a space, and the hierarchy and the social networks and the social structure of domination can persist. They're not challenged. If you have the equity word in there, it puts those systems of domination in focus. And it
yeah.
allows us to work and rework, and engage in the protracted struggle of working and reworking ourselves, but also reworking the relationship. So, like, I'm curious, Dre 2024, do you agree with that? Do you disagree? Tell me what you think.
No, I think I definitely agree with that, and I think that um, I think that in like I feel like in order to move forward, I think we just need to continue having those conversations and keep on like pushing forwards and creating this space, because I think that is what is missing in a lot of the narratives and conversations that we're having.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, for sure. We're closing out in 5 minutes. Let's quickly talk about easy, low-hanging fruit ways that teachers can integrate this learning into their classrooms. Dre 2024, what do you think?
Well, use the text. Now that I know this exists, I'm like saving it. I'm going to save it in my files, because I think, like again, that's important. And also, one of the things that was brought up in my dissertation defense was, when teaching youth, like the narrative around like making sure that a question that came up was like, are you showcasing the amount of violence that happens in the movements?
Mm.
And like, how honest are we about, when movements happen? Like, there is like we have in this text around, uh, burning down the house because we chose not to. We created our own space,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the realities of that. And so I think that is important to, highlight in these things, not to scare us or to put us in to fear, but understanding reality and what happens in terms of like what are these resistance spaces. And then two, and this is like separate from what I was just saying, one thing I was thinking about as we were reading this text is like, how do we have students rewrite that conversation? So
Mm.
if we're so used to that one narrative, and then you introduce another narrative or another storyline like this storyline, how do the students rewrite that story?
And I would add, how do they write themselves into the story?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think, I'm going to go on our, the second design principle of the framework is start with yourself, because our lens for the world and our identities help us make sense. And as I said at the beginning, as one person that lives in relationship with other people, I only have part of the story.
Mm.
And in order to understand the parts of the story that are out of my field of vision, I need to be in relationship with others. But I think first it is the awareness that you don't know everything, or the
Yeah.
awareness that you only have part of the story. And I think that's the power of these liberation library texts, because each time I encounter something new, I was like, how come I didn't know this? How come I didn't know
Right.
this? I got an elite education from some of the best schools in the world. How come I didn't know this?
Right.
And it calls into question. It allows me to resituate my own identity as a learner, to say like, this does not stop. Our like we have to keep on making ourselves better so we can be in better relationship with others. So we're going to come back to this text. Definitely want to thank everyone who's watching this now, who watched it before, who will watch it in the future. We're going to dance our way out like we always do. And we'll see you the next time. Same text, same place, in a couple of weeks, exploring the Federal Alliance of Land Grants, Reies Tijerina's work, and what we can do and how we can connect to our work and our struggles today. Equity work is not left, right. It's not left. It's not right. It's not centered. It's forward. So let's push forward together.